And so it shapes our character. It teaches us how to rejoice in suffering. It gives us a peace with God that can't come when we're withholding what He deserves. And it shows us how to trust. But I think ultimately when we give, it's because we have new priorities. If you're taking notes, write down Matthew chapter 6. In Matthew chapter 6, verse 25 and following, Jesus is talking about how much we worry. And the very things we worry about, He says, don't worry about what you will eat or drink or what you will wear. He says, look at the lilies of the field. Are they not clothed more majestically than Solomon in all his splendor? He said, if I take care of the flowers that are here today and gone tomorrow, and I've spent 9 months knitting you together in your mother's womb, if I know you personally and have put my image in you and did nothing of that with the flowers, I'm not going to leave you high and dry. He says, stop worrying. Rick Warren says, if you know how to worry, then you know how to pray. You just change the direction of your thoughts. When you worry, it's about, oh, me, me, me. But when you pray, it's all about God. God, it's you, it's you, it's you. And so when we give, it has nothing to do necessarily with the amount. It's because of what God is doing inside of us. He has become this source that begins to change us and flow out of us so that our character is more like His. Our peace with Him is sound because we give Him everything that He deserves. Our life has new priorities, and those things that seem to be important are no longer important because God is King. But then Paul said it doesn't stop there. Giving blesses the receiver. Look in verses 12 and 13. For the ministry of this service is not only fully supplying the needs of the saints, but it's also overflowing through many thanksgivings to God. He said the saints, what they were giving was to other believers. And when you put money in the offering plate and you don't designate it to anything, much of that goes to helping us as believers. Much of it helps pay my salary, Brother Scott's salary. It pays to have the lights on and the air conditioner running. It helps us do much of what happens here in Winnsboro. But close to 40% of what you put in the offering plate leaves this place. It goes to help do missions here in Winnsboro. It does missions all across the state and all across the nation. And so when you give, you help other believers do what God has called them to do. And so giving is not this idea of trying to impress others or to impress God. Giving is how the body breathes. Giving is how the body does its work. Giving is you saying, I'm a finger, and the toe has to have nourishment. And so I'm going to give so that the toe can live. I'm going to give so that the body can live as it needs to, so that all of the body has the nourishment that it needs to survive. I don't have to give everything, but I give sacrificially. I give because I know that God can do something with this that I can't do with it if I keep it in my hands. If I unleash it, then God can do things unimaginable. And when we give, it does make us weak, because when we give, there's no guarantee it's coming back. There's no guarantee that you'll ever see that money again. And there doesn't have to be, because that's why faith has been given to us. That we say, God, I don't know what you'll do with that, but you can do far more with it than I could. And at some point, I may need that specific amount of money, but I'm going to trust you that you're going to take care of it. So that's how the body works. It's not impressing God, not trying to prove a point, but it is an expression of faith. And so giving is much about you, but it also happens to help other people. But then look what he said in the second part of verse 12 and then on into 13. It is overflowing through the many thanksgivings to God. Because of the proof given by this ministry, they will glorify God for your obedience to your confession of the gospel of Christ and for the liberality of your contribution to them and to all. Finally, giving makes God famous. Giving makes God famous. When people hear that people in Winnsboro got together and helped raise $7,000 over a weekend, do you think they go, man, those people are great? Some of them might. But those of them who know that God is about this, God is in this, they go, look what God can do. This morning I had to run the grocery store. And the Sunday morning crowd at Brookshire's is always an interesting crowd. Because some of them you go, they're dressed like they're going to church, they must be here having coffee. Or some of them, I don't think they're going to church, they must come here to try to avoid the church people. But in the parking lot at Brookshire's this morning were a bunch of men with yellow hats. Southern Baptist men. Headed down to Harlingen to help recover from Hurricane Dolly. Gathering together in the parking lot at Brookshire's so they can caravan down there. It's men who are saying, not only am I going to give God my money, but God, I'm going to give you all my talents and resources. I'm going to give you part of my retirement, and I'm going to head down south, and I'm going to help somebody because it may just give me the opportunity to tell people about you and make you famous. My giving makes you famous, and that's why I live. I live to know you better and become more like you so that other people can know you. I asked you in this process to tell me about giving. One man in the church has had an opportunity to help start a new mission, an effort to reach children. And every time I talk to him, he tells me it's something new that God's doing. Because he's willing to give of his time and willing to respond to the call that God has on his life. We've had people who have gone out all summer long who are doing mission work. Many who have said, I really wasn't sure what God was going to do. And I wasn't altogether certain that I wanted to do this because it was a step of faith and it was difficult and it was challenging. But oh, what God has done because I was willing to let him be God and no longer trust myself. And so giving is not just about your money. That's a huge part because that's the greatest opportunity we have to have an idol. Some other God in our life is our money. But our time can be our God. Our treasures and possessions can be our God. And so God asks us to give our time and our talent and our treasures because in doing so, it will make him famous. So what do you do? Third point is a plan for giving. How do you incorporate this into your life? First, you have to pray. Pray about your giving. Some of you still are not convinced that you need to do this. There's plenty of money in the bank. They don't need my money. No, we don't need it. But look at what you miss out on when you don't give. Read some statistics this week. About 17% of Christians who were polled, I think it was a Barna group, 17% said that tithing was important. I would hope that 100% would, but 17 said it. But from what they discovered, there were about 6% of those Christians who tithe. 6 out of every 100 who actually give their 10%. I thought, wow. Imagine what God's people could do for God's kingdom if God's people would act like God's people. Now, I have a great assurance that there are more than 6% in our church who tithe. But I know it's not 100. And until it is, I'm not helping you as his people become what God wants you to be. And so I have to help you see in Scripture that this is the right thing to do. Not because we need your money, but man, the things we can do in God's kingdom to make God famous when God's people will let God be God. So you've got to pray about it. You've got to ask God to convince you that this is the right thing to do. But you also then have to decide what and when you will give. Kind of comically, you heard in the video, should I tithe from my net or should I tithe from my gross? Well, it's according to how much you sow, how much you will reap. According to how much faith you really want to invest in the Lord. That some would say, well, it's got to be in the Bible somewhere. Well, you could find it probably in 1st Hesitations or 2nd Hezekiah. That somewhere in there that you're supposed to tithe on the gross. It's not there. But what it does say is that God expects this because you're robbing him if you're not. Because in reality, you'll give people who are tangible, that can touch you and threaten you. You'll give them what they ask for. God says, I don't want to be a threatening God. I'm a loving God. And if I'm loving and I own all things and I've let you borrow these things, wouldn't it make sense to show me that you trust me and give some back? Because with that responsibility, I'll give you more. But I'm going to expect more. And there are many who will say, I don't think I want God to work in my life. So they don't give, and he won't work. And they live just a dull, boring existence. And God doesn't become famous in your life because you don't trust him. So you have to decide what to give and when you'll give. You have to make some changes in your priorities. It may be that you do set your thermostat up a degree or two, that you cancel your cable or you lower your bill, that you don't have to have this unlimited cell phone plan or you don't have to have 4011 texting minutes. Did I look at y'all? I meant to. It could be that you realize, I can change my priorities because God is most important. Not all these things that I think are important. Talked with a young man this week. He said, you asked about giving. He said, we talked one time and I got under conviction because I realized I was not living right. And oh, what God has done in my life because I put him first.